Home sellers, today we're continuing our series where we expose more real estate BS. Your first buyer is your best buyer. How many times have you heard this one? It's one of those sayings agents love to use to pressure sellers into accepting the first offer they get. But let me tell you, while the first buyer is certainly important, they're not always the best buyer. In fact, they could just be the key to finding your best buyer, or they could be the start of a bidding war. You just never know. So today I'm going to show you how to leverage the first offer you get to get the most money for your home without falling prey to this old chestnut from listing agents who just want to get you to sign. Stick around and we will expose the lies. Welcome to Talking Realty, the go-to podcast for home sellers who want to make more money, save time, and avoid the traps of traditional real estate models. If you're a DIY seller, an investor, or homeowner looking to sell smarter, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Glen Whitten, 20-year realtor and founder of the Ohio Property Group. Most home sellers hate paying huge commissions to realtors. At the Ohio Property Group, we do all the same things as other agents, but instead of charging a 6% commission, we charge a low flat fee. So our sellers save thousands of dollars and they get better results. To learn more, head over to talkingrealty.com and pick up our monthly newsletter or any of our free home seller tools. Now, let's get to it. Oh, home sellers. Real estate BS. I mean, it's about as common as air. So from the moment I got licensed, as I mentioned in the last episode, I started hanging around experienced listing agents, and before I got licensed, I was shadowing. So I've been collecting these little pieces of advice that realtors love to say to agents and to their sellers. And this one is at the top of my hit list because, like the one from last week about how open houses don't work, this one is just self-serving garbage. And frankly, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. In today's topic, we're going to expose another pile of real estate BS and show you how to take control of your sale, how to avoid pressure tactics, and how to maximize your profit when you sell. Today's episode is all about the myth of the first buyer, and we'll talk about why agents love saying this and how you can use that first offer to your advantage. But in the meantime, I also want to teach you what strategies actually lead to success, how you can leverage that buyer into a really good thing. I can still vividly remember the first time I heard this one. I was about 2 weeks in, and one of the agents in my office was heading out. It was a snowy night, bitter, cold night, and they were heading out to present an offer to one of their sellers. Now, we're 100% virtual, so we never present offers in person. We do them by email and with usually some sort of video overlay explaining the process. But back in those days, you got in your car and you drove out to the listing and you sat in their living room or at their kitchen and you went over the offer with them in the hopes that either they would counter or they would hopefully just accept it. So on the way over, I'm asking him kind of what to expect. And he said that his job was to, this is a direct quote, sell it to the seller. Sell it. Okay. All right. Since traditional agents don't get paid until closing, it is in their best interest to get the house under contract, regardless of whether this is the best deal for the seller or not. And once again, we see the flaw in the I only get paid at closing model that traditional agents love to use. This is built-in conflict of interest. I did a whole series of real estate flaw videos. They're on my website. You can check them out. But I will link to the real estate flaw about the at closing commission. So traditional realtors love to sell the I only get paid if I do my job model, which is great. So you sign up with them, they market your home, and if they don't get it sold or you don't make it to closing for any reason, you don't owe them anything. Sounds like a great thing for home sellers. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not a great thing, because the moment you sign that contract, your interests and the listing agent's interests are no longer aligned. 99% of the sellers I meet, yes, they want to get to closing, but they want to get there with as much money as possible and as few headaches as possible. So that means all along the way, when there's an issue, whether it's during the initial negotiation, whether it's during inspections, if you get a low appraisal, you get a bad inspection report, you have a survey problem, you have a title problem, the listing agent is going to somehow advise you. And you got to ask yourself, is this really the best advice? Or is this listing agent trying to protect their commission, which is now on the schedule for closing date? If we delay it or cost them their commission, obviously that's not going to sit well with the listing agent. But what if the right answer, what if the right advice is for you, the seller, to walk away or to play hardball with the buyer? What if that's the real answer? Well, you may or may not know that because the listing agent may not even recognize that. Maybe the listing agent is subconsciously afraid of losing their commission or delaying their commission for whatever reason. They're not even necessarily going to be aware that the advice they're giving you is self-serving. So having a commission at closing is a problem, folks. And I know that's not what we're really talking about here, but yes, it is. Because this little chestnut of advice, which is your first buyer is your best buyer. And if honestly, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I'd probably have at least $17. So I've heard it a lot. It's a lot of nickels in case I don't know if you're doing the math or not on that. It's a lot of nickels. So when I hear it, I get really, really, really irritated. I've actually had sellers say this to me. Oh, well, your first buyer is your best buyer. We already know that. Is it? Well, okay, we don't know that. First of all, I know that over the course of my many, many long years, very often the first buyer is not the best buyer because in today's world, the first buyer is probably going to be a bottom feeder. I did a couple of episodes on this a while back, but these are people who just fire off garbage offers, hoping that a seller is looking for a fast, quick sale and doesn't care about their bottom line. But the good news is you can definitely use that offer. Anyway, what the phrase means, your first buyer is your best buyer, it just means that the first offer you get tends to be the strongest and you should take it quickly because you don't want to lose momentum. You don't want to waste your best buyer. And then everybody after that, you're just going to be regretting that you didn't take the first offer. I can tell you this has happened. We've had really good offers come in. Seller, for whatever reason, didn't take it or maybe fiddled around with it too long, hoping to get something else going. And the first buyer got ticked off and walked away, or they got distracted, or they came out of their bidding war funk and decided to move on, or, who knows. But anyway, there certainly have been times where the first offer turns out to be the best offer we end up seeing. But it's not worthy of a rule, of a truth. Your first buyer is your best buyer. That's what's so irritating about it, is because listing agents throw this around like it is the truth. And we know better. Yeah. The reason agents use it, I think, is pretty self-evident, but just in case, it does help them secure a quick sale, gets the property under contract. It definitely reduces their workload because once they get it under contract, now the clock is ticking. And most sellers are human and they start to spend a little of that money and start to plan the next chapter after the sale closes. So everybody is starting to think in terms of, okay, we've got a date. We know when we're going to get paid. This is a good thing. Sellers often feel very anxious. And when that first offer comes through, depending on the seller's situation, they might just snap it up just because they're desperate. When the reality is they could be leaving an awful lot of money on the table by doing that. Having an agent who's clear-headed, not influenced by the outcome, and whose only job is to get you the best deal is important right now, because one of the jobs that I have as a listing agent is to buffer you from your own feelings, to keep you from doing stupid stuff because your emotions are running out of control. Truth number 3, emotions are expensive. So part of my job is to insulate you from that. So how do you know if your first buyer is your best buyer? And that is a case by case. Now, where we like to start before the property hits the market is to go through a dream offer exercise. This is covered in my book, which I will link to in the show notes. But the dream offer exercise is where a seller sits down and looks at kind of an offer review, pro forma, if you will. What's my dream price? What's my buy it now price? Like if I got this price, this would be the number where I wouldn't blink. If I could get this number, I'm in. Okay. Then what terms are we looking for? What's the possession date that you really want? What furniture do you or do you not want to part with? How do you feel about inspections? If you've done a pre-inspection, you don't care. If you've got very solid on value and comps, then you don't care about an appraisal. If you've had a recent survey, then you don't care about the survey. So you kind of check all those things off. And if an offer flies in that meets all of your criteria, that in other words, mirrors your dream offer, then you know that's an offer you should take. But too often, sellers will get that first offer and think, oh, well, maybe I can get a better offer. And sometimes they will, as I said earlier, aggravate the buyer who knows they put in a good offer, by the way. Buyers are not in a vacuum. They understand that they know what the rest of the market looks like. They know they've given you probably a fair offer, maybe. But anyhow, if it meets your dream offer, great. Let's proceed. And I'll talk about how to do that. If it does not meet your dream offer, then let's talk about how to leverage it. If it's above asking, can they provide appraisal gap insurance? So we see this a lot. Let's just say the house is priced at 200,000 and we get an offer from a eager buyer that's for 220. Well, that's great, but what if it doesn't appraise for 220? Is the buyer willing to make up the difference in cash? And we usually look for the difference between list price and what they offered. So if they offered 20,000 in this case over list price, I'm going to ask for appraisal gap insurance. And I'm not going to specify an amount, but if they come back and say, yeah, I'll give you $500, I'm going to say, no, 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 no. You pushed us 20,000 over list price. I need you to cover that gap. This is what we tell them. We're not concerned about it, but just in case, since you took us here, can you back that up? Many times they'll say yes. Sometimes they say no. But the point is for the seller, you need to go in eyes wide open. I'll probably do a whole episode on appraisal gap coverage, or at least include it deeply in another episode at some point down the road. So that's one aspect of it. Are they going to waive contingencies? That's another strengthening offer. As you may have heard on this podcast or through some of my other communication, we have a holy grail offer, which is cash, no inspections, no appraisal, just cash in and out. That's a holy grail offer, assuming it is financially where the seller wants to be. So the closer we get to that, the better. If the buyer is going to waive contingencies or offer a huge earnest money deposit or both, do they have a documented pre-approval, or are they cash with documented proof of funds? How strong is the buyer? It's not just about the offer, it's about the buyer as well. So we look at all those things, we weigh them out, and we determine it meets our dream offer or gets very, very close, and the buyer is really, really strong. I think we've got a green light. In that case, ironically, your first buyer is probably your best buyer. The other time to consider the first buyer as your best buyer is if it's a decent offer and you've been on the market longer than you expected to be. So look at the average days on market for your area. And if you are approaching that number and haven't had any offers, if that offer is decent, you may strongly consider taking that offer, because it's unlikely after, say, 3 or 4 weeks on the market without a price change that you're going to start a bidding war. Could happen, and we'll talk about maybe how to generate that here in a little bit. But odds are, if you get that first offer and you have no other showings lined up and you haven't had a lot of traction, this may be your best buyer. Okay, so food for thought. The other thing you can try to dig into is what's the buyer's motivation. So if you've been on the market for a while and you get a really, really strong offer, we get a lot of people asking why a seller is moving. I think it's fair play to ask a buyer why they're moving. What's going on? Are we just upgrading our house? Are we getting closer to work, school? Are we expanding our family? Did we have a job change, family change, divorce? What's going on? What's driving the buyer to get out and buy another house? That could tell you something. So if this is a really motivated buyer and there's not a ton of inventory on the market, they may put in a very strong offer because they're much more interested in getting it done than they are in, beating you up for every dollar they can get. That could come later, but that's another conversation. This episode of Talking Realty is brought to you by our friends at Associates Title. This team is shaking things up by focusing on what truly matters, putting the customer first. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, for sale by owner, or working with a realtor, they've got your back with incredible cost savings, great service, and the latest technology to streamline the process. Their secure online portal keeps everyone in the loop, from buyers and sellers to lenders to agents, all while keeping your data safe and communications crystal clear. If you're getting ready to make a move, don't underestimate the importance of having a great title company in your corner. Check them out today at associatestitleinc.com or call my friend Ryan Phillips at 614-419-2418. Check the show notes for those links. Do not leave your title company choice to chance, and definitely don't let the buyer or their agent make that choice for you. Now, back to the podcast. Okay, but let's say your first buyer is not particularly strong, or you're getting a ton of action. So this would happen typically right after a price change or when you first introduce the property to the market. Sometimes you'll get an offer right away that's a decent offer, but it's in the first 6 hours, and they usually come with a really short offer deadline. Offer deadlines I have covered many times before, so I will link to that in the show notes. Just remember though, your first buyer may be your best buyer, but their offer doesn't necessarily have to be their final offer. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to stir up some competition. And by doing a whisper campaign, you're going to try to generate more interest from other potential buyers. And that means you're going to go through your open house sign-in sheets. You're going to go through anybody that's ever showed the property, anybody that's scheduled to show the property, anybody who's even mentioned they might be interested. You're going to go back to them one by one, and you're going to say, hey, just letting you know, we're negotiating an offer right now, and thought you'd want to know in case you, if they're the buyer, or your buyer, if they're an agent, are planning to make a move. Either way, best of luck. Sometimes I throw in the line of, I just figured if I were in your shoes, I'd want to know. Either way, best of luck. So it's a casual, you're throwing it out there, and I covered this heavily on the last episode. If it's early, right after you introduce the property or right after a price change, and you're getting significant interest. So in other words, you get this offer, but you've got 12 showings and you're starting to get the questions, hey, do you have any offers? Which is a great indicator that you're probably going to get offers. Then I might consider setting offer deadline. So that's probably when I would pull that particular trigger. So you want to go back to the first offer. So if it's a really good offer and you don't want to aggravate them, maybe just negotiate with them one-on-one. And we can talk about how to do that here in a second. But if you really want to stoke the fire, you're getting a ton of other indicators, go ahead and let that buyer know that you're getting a lot of interest, and you will consider their offer as you sift through everything else that's happening. Some first buyers will come back and ask you, well, what other offers do you have? They're going to want to nail you down. Do you have offers? How many offers do you have? What are the terms of those offers? You're not going to get into any of that. You're just going to tell them, our famous line, naturally, I can't get into that. But my advice is to put your best foot forward. I love that one. Some may employ escalation clauses, stuff like that. And it's a conversation for another day. We're not going to dig into that. Some common mistakes that sellers make, however, with that first offer that makes it impossible for us to leverage that buyer to get better offers or to get a better offer from that buyer is that a seller will act desperate. I'm dealing with this firsthand right now. I've got one seller in particular this week who's just, he is extremely eager and he wants everything right now, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But when a seller starts going around us and starts talking directly to the buyer or the agents for the buyers, they think they are somehow magically improving the situation. And I'm here to tell you, they are not. There are a handful of things that sellers do when they get that first offer or when they're working on our first offer that completely torpedo the process. And the first one is appearing way too anxious, way too eager, and my favorite word, desperate. Desperate sellers repel good buyers. Desperate sellers repel good offers. Desperate sellers drive offers down. And when a seller starts to behave like this is part of that truth number 3, emotions are expensive. When a seller starts to behave like this, they really don't understand how badly they're hurting their own cause. They think, okay, well, I'm moving fast, I'm negotiating like a pro, when all they're really doing is sending the signal that we have no other buyers, and I really don't want this to go badly. By remaining calm and cool and collected and maybe taking a little bit longer to respond, not a lot, but a little bit, maybe being a little more vague and less eager, you're going to stoke the fire of interest with that buyer. And that is critical to maximizing the offer. The other is moving way too fast. So they get the offer, and unless it's a freaking home run, cash, holy grail, by all means, get it signed and get it over. But there's such a thing as the winner's curse. You don't want the buyer feeling like, oh my gosh, I could have got this for a lot less, especially if we have other hurdles to contend with throughout the rest of the process. If there are inspections and appraisals or something like that coming up, you've given away all leverage or a big chunk of it by snapping that offer up in the first 5 minutes. You've sent a signal that they overpaid. That's not going to escape the buyer's camp, and they're going to want some retribution if they can find a way to do it. They may even get so dismayed that they find a way to get out of the deal. So keep that in mind. Take a little bit of time, be cool, don't panic, and let it happen on a normal schedule. If you've got really high demand, then this offer is really just a starting point. Waiting a day or so could give you a chance to bring in stronger buyers, especially, like I said, if this is right after a price change or right after you introduce the property to the market. If the offer has a deadline, I'm begging you, for the 1 millionth time, ignore the offer deadline. Just they're 100% psychological. They are designed to push the seller into a hasty decision. And this happens, folks, this happens a lot when a property is new to the market. You'll get the first or second showing will fire off an offer that's decent. It's maybe not great. Maybe it's even full price. And it's got like a 6-hour, 4-hour, 3-hour, 2-hour deadline. That is meant to get you to stop all showings, take their offer and move on. When you never know, you could start a bidding war. That's what they don't want. They're not putting that offer deadline in there to benefit you. And if the buyer is truly in love with the house, it's not like 1 minute after the deadline, they're not going to be in love with the house. When a buyer puts an offer deadline into an offer, I routinely ignore it. And that has literally never cost me a deal. If the buyer, for some reason, walks away because you didn't respond by the deadline, then they weren't going to make it. They were never going to make it. A buyer who's in love with a house is not going to walk away 1 minute after the deadline. The only time, legally speaking, that an offer deadline is even valid is if you're going to accept the offer without a single solitary change. No changes. Not one single letter, number, decimal point is changing in the entire offer. If you're going to take it literally exactly as it's written, then if you sign it before the offer deadline, fine. It is now a legal contract. If you're going to change anything about the offer, it is technically, legally, a counter offer. The first offer is no longer valid. You are now essentially making an offer back to them. That offer no longer has anything to do with the offer deadline. So I get sellers all the time panicking because of a 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Sunday morning deadline, and they're blowing up my phone, with, oh my God, the deadline's in 4 minutes. Well, are you taking the offer the way it's written? No, I want to counter it. Ignore the deadline. Just ignore it. Another common mistake would be to not negotiate. Buyers almost always anticipate some sort of counteroffer, some sort of negotiation back and forth. Just as sellers love to commit the classic blunder, which is to overprice your house so you can negotiate down, buyers very often will come in lower than they can, hoping that there's enough room there for them to negotiate up to your number. Buyers get this, and they know this going in. And a lot of sellers will feel pressured to accept that first offer exactly how it's written. Again, unless it's a dream offer, holy grail offer, very rarely do we see sellers who want to take the offer exactly the way it's written. It's not the end of the world to counter the deal. And you can do it verbally. This is a little pro tip for you. But if, let's just say you have an offer that either has no deadline or the deadline is a long way off. Sometimes we get them with 3 or 4 day deadlines. Okay, great. Keep in mind, by the way, there's another sidebar to my sidebar. A buyer can withdraw an offer. They can rescind it at a moment's notice with no acknowledgement from you. All they have to do is send an email that says we're rescinding our offer as of this time. So they're out. So the offer deadline truly is meaningless because you can respond later, still put the deal together. They can withdraw sooner and the deal is dead, no matter what you want to do, even if you would have taken it. But back to my pro tip. Let's say you would be okay with this offer. You're not loving it, but you're okay with it. You would take it. And the offer deadline isn't for another day or two. Great. Assuming the buyer doesn't withdraw the offer for any reason, you can verbally go back to them and do a counter. Like, hey, can we do this? And change the term, whatever term you want. Don't do it on paper. Just do it in an email or a text or something like that, or a phone call, whatever makes you happy. That just says, hey, can we do this price? Or can we do this closing date? Or can we do this, whatever? Insert your new term here. If they say no or tell you to get lost or they don't respond and you're getting nervous before the offer deadline, if they haven't withdrawn the offer, sign it, send it back. You got yourself a deal. You just sign their original offer. So there's a pro tip for you if you're really nervous about it. Another mistake that sellers make is they fail to communicate with other interested buyers. I mentioned my whisper campaign earlier. This isn't just a great idea. This is something you need to do because I can't tell you the number of times a seller didn't want to or didn't employ the whisper campaign, took the offer, and then we find out after the property updates in the MLS, I'm getting hate mail from other buyers or agents saying, hey, are you kidding me? My buyer was just about to write an offer on it. We just looked at it yesterday and blah, blah, blah. And they're kind of pissed off at me because we didn't tell them. Now, shame on them. If they were going to put an offer in, they should have told me. And some people don't want to telegraph their intentions, and I get that. But, again, that's their gamble. So I don't feel bad about it. I just feel like maybe we left money on the table. So another common blunder. Something else to keep in mind, this isn't necessarily a blunder, but it's a tool for you to use, is that if the buyer has an agent, that agent is entirely interested in getting this deal put together. That agent, just like your listing agent, doesn't get paid unless they get the buyer under contract and get it all the way to closing. So if you take an agent that is in that situation, you tell them, hey, I've got a buyer for my house. We're getting ready to negotiate, or we are negotiating an offer. Just drop it on them. That's part of your whisper campaign. Keep in mind that when you do your whisper campaign properly, the buyer agents are going to start kind of working for you, because if their buyer's at all interested, they're going to go back to them and fan that flame for you. It's like, oh my gosh, remember Truth 11, nothing motivates a buyer like another buyer. When you tell that agent for other buyers that you have an offer on the table that you're negotiating right now, their inclination is going to be to go back to their buyer, if there's any interest at all, and try to get them to put in an offer. Because they've got a reason to contact them. They've got a legit sense of urgency, and this house could get away from them. So if the buyer was, quote unquote, thinking it over, this is a chance for the agent to step in and say, thinking time is over. We do now or we don't. That works. Most home sellers dread inspection and appraisal issues. Our digital course, Living to Listing, teaches you how to turn any property into the perfect listing so you sail through inspections, sail through appraisals, sell faster, and for more money with a lot fewer headaches, by the way. In Living to Listing, you're going to get dozens of checklists, many tools, and walkthrough videos from yours truly for every step. And here's my promise. If Living to Listing doesn't meet your standards, if it somehow falls short of your expectations, all you got to do is let me know. Not only will I give you your money back, I'm going to let you keep the course. That's how confident I am that you're going to love this and that it's going to make you money. You literally have nothing to lose. Check out the free preview videos at livingtolisting.com. That's livingtolisting.com. Let me know what you think. Now, back to your show. So what do you do with that first offer? Tactically speaking, because I like to give you actionable advice, is first thing you do when you get the offer is acknowledge the offer. Don't say anything good or bad about it. Just acknowledge the offer. I like to thank them and say, thanks, I got it. I'll be in touch as soon as we have a response. That's it. Most of the time, that is it until it's getting closer to making a decision. If you're in multiples, feel free to drop that casually unless you plan to set an offer deadline. Again, see the last episode for that. The other thing to do is take a breath. Don't feel pressured to respond immediately. Don't feel pressured to accept or counter within minutes. And ask yourself, does this offer meet my goals? How does it contrast and compare to my dream offer? And is there room to negotiate here? Run your whisper campaign. Notify interested parties or anybody who's shown it, or come to your open houses to encourage some competition. And remember, a few rules. It's not about getting that first offer. It's about the best offer, regardless of who it comes from. And as we like to say, if it's not a good deal for everyone, including you, then it's not a good deal. So if you get that first offer and it doesn't meet your needs, you have nothing to lose at that point. You might as well leverage it to try to get other offers through your whisper campaign or through setting an offer deadline. And then eventually through a counter offer. I don't care how stinky the offer is. It's good for all three of those activities. It's good for a whisper campaign because you're not going to reveal that it's a stinky offer to the rest of the world. You can tell them you got an offer. It's good for setting an offer deadline because you don't have any other activity going on anyway, or maybe you do. This is impetus to move forward. This is hopefully the pebble that starts the avalanche. And then thirdly, if you get no other offers, nobody steps up to all your other activity, you can always go back to this buyer and say, hey, I can't do this, but I can do this. And hopefully you find some common ground. So when we respond to offers, I have a handful of advice for you on responding to offers. First is my "we're close" response. This is when you've got an offer that's pretty much right on the pin, but maybe it's got some problems. Maybe they've chosen a title company that's really expensive or that has terrible service or has data problems, whatever. That's a good thing to counter. Maybe the possession or closing date doesn't work for you. Maybe they've got a ridiculously long inspection period. I like 7 to 10 days total. We should be able to wrap up inspections, including the remedy process, within a week or two. If they've got it on there for 21 days or they've got a financing clause that gives them up until the day of closing to get final approval, all that stuff, garbagey stuff, let's clean that up. So you can tell them, and this is including price, if they're close on price but not quite there, just say, hey, this is in an email, which is how I do all my responses. We're still sifting through everything that's coming in. And you're planting a seed there. And we still have showings, but I think we're close enough to make this work. If you can do this, and that's where you insert your price, your terms, whatever you want, then we can wrap this up now. Okay, one more time. We're still sifting through everything that's coming in. We still have showings, but I think we're close enough to make this work. If you can do this, then we can wrap this up right now. If it's a buyer, I will end with, can you work with this? Question mark. Thanks, Glenn. If it's an agent, I will say, can you make this happen? Kind of playing on their ego to be an operator, shrewd negotiator. Can you make this happen? Now, if you are a country mile apart and you're countering, here's what you say. As you know, we are a long way apart and it seems unlikely that we will come together. What am I doing? I'm kind of anchoring their expectations to say, look, this is a long shot. I'm basically giving you a courtesy here because ordinarily I probably should have just rejected or ignored you, but I'm being a nice person today. So again, as you know, we are a long way apart and it seems unlikely that we will come together. But if you can do this, insert your price, terms, etc., then perhaps we can bridge the gap and put this together. What do you think? One more time. As you know, we're a long way apart and it seems unlikely that we'll come together. But if you can do this, then perhaps we can bridge the gap and put this together. What do you think? Send it. You got nothing to lose. If you're in a situation where you're barge pole distance apart and you think you can make it work, you can always employ the Ackerman. Now, this is one of my very favorite things. I use it more during inspections when they've asked for, say, 20,000 in repairs and my seller only wants to give them 3,000. I use Ackerman to bridge the gap. This came from the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I will link to it in the show notes. One of my very favorite negotiators. It's actually the go-to book for negotiating. And also, it's just, frankly, it's a really entertaining read. He's a retired hostage negotiator, international hostage negotiator for the FBI. So guy knows what he's doing. Anyhow, he talks about bridging the gap with his formula, which is better coming from him. But the short version is to give them 65% of what they want as a first counter. Step 1, step 2 is to go to 85%. Step 3 is to go to 95% and start throwing in what he calls non-monetary items. For a seller, it might be the swing set that they said they wanted, or the TV in the den that you were going to take, but you'd be willing to leave it. Something they eyeballed at the walkthrough or the inspection that they were like, ooh, is that for sale? If you're willing to part with it and you don't really care, good time to throw it in. Also a great place for home warranties. I don't like home warranties on a listing, but it's a great negotiating tool for a kind of a non-monetary item. Anyway, eventually you'll get there. So see the Ackerman stuff, Google it or put it through ChatGPT. It will explain it a lot better than I just did. If it's close, here's one more tactic for you. If the deal is close and you want to kind of throw it down like you're really serious, then go ahead and do all the paperwork, right? Sign everything they sent you, put a line through anything you want to change and initial it with your new change. So let's just say it's price. You're going to put a line through the price. If it's 200, you want 220, you're going to scratch off 200. You're going to write in 220,000. You're going to initial it. Then you're going to sign everything. So do that whole line through, write in the change, initial it. This is now a legal counter offer. Send it back to them. Put a little cover on it if you want, but not necessary. Just let them know, hey, I think we're close. I made some changes. Here you go. Let me know. Like, just send it over. If you're really far apart, on the other hand, or you're working with multiple buyers, I like to just use email, keep it verbal, if you will. It's email, but it's still technically verbal. And don't commit to 100%. Say things like, I believe we can do this if, or we should be able to put this together if, or like I said, I think we're close. I believe we can make this work if. In my case, I've got the extra buffer because I'm not the decision maker, the seller is. So I can say things like, I think the seller will do this, or, stuff like that kind of leads them down the path of, hey, I might have even had a seller between you and me. Tell me I will do this, but I won't necessarily put it there if I think there's room to negotiate. Food for thought. But if it's a really, really good offer, if you get a holy grail, don't mess around with it. Get it done. Don't aggravate them. Don't do it right away because you don't want the winner's curse to set in, but take some time, maybe ask some clarifying questions if you need to, but then eventually get it done. Don't try not to go overnight if you don't have to on a really good offer that you really want to take. Truth number 10, the love between buyer and seller peaks during the offer and fades all the way to closing. So don't unnecessarily burn any of the love from the love tank during the offer phase. If it's a deal you really want, let's just go ahead and get it done, just not too quickly. All right. So to recap, your first buyer might be your best buyer, but only if the offer meets your goals, aka your dream offer. You can leverage that first offer to maximize your sale price by involving other buyers and letting them fight it out, or by letting your first buyer know that you have other interest and letting them negotiate against themselves. Do not, however, let outdated and self-serving advice, aka garbage, rush you into accepting less than your property is worth because somebody told you that your first buyer is your best buyer. And with that, I'll let you get back to your day. Thanks for sticking around. Hopefully you had a little bit of fun, learned a little bit. If so, please share this episode with someone or on the socials. Feel free to tag me if you do. The Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by Associates Title and the Ohio Property Group, a family-owned brokerage serving all 88 Ohio counties with outstanding realtor services. By the way, if you have questions or topics or guests you'd like us to cover in a future episode, I would love to hear from you. Head over to talkingrealty.com and say hello. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep making smart moves in your real estate journey. For the Ohio Property Group, this is Glen Whitten signing off. And remember, you can sell it. We can help.